Hello class. In today's lecture I want to talk about advanced directives and what they have to do with our major ethical theories that we've covered, and finally talking about two differing opinions that we saw in our readings. So let me get to it. So first off, what is an advance directive? An advance directive is a legal document that you prepare in advance for the possibility of medical situations where you're not able to give your fully informed consent. Very frequently when we're talking about advance directives, we're talking about people with some form of dementia. Dementia, the category is when your mental faculties are failing due to a medical situation like Alzheimer's or vascular dementia. Talking about people, also patients sometimes have what's colloquially referred to as sundowner syndrome, a form of dementia that's more severe in the evenings when you're tired, and that you're better off in the mornings, more cognitively aware and ability to make your own decisions. Various situations where a patient knows their diagnosis, knows when they need to make those decisions in order to be fully autonomous, making those decisions on their own, and an advance directive is prepared in the moments when they're mentally there enough to make those decisions for themselves. The other major type of medical condition that we very often talk about with advance directives is when somebody's in a permanent vegetative state. We colloquially call comas. So there's a decision. If somebody is in a permanent coma, they've perhaps had their higher brain functions damaged severely by, say, an auto accident, but we have the technology to keep their body alive, keep their heart beating and their breath flowing. Should we do that endlessly, or should we pull the plug, as we say? And if a patient has an advance directive, they get to make that decision themselves instead of their loved ones or a proxy assigned by the state. So it's somewhat of a range of different legal documents that can be prepared to prepare for the situations where you're not cognitively able to make your own decisions. Of course, it's worth mentioning I'm a philosopher, not a lawyer and not a doctor. So I'm just going to speak briefly about some major different categories of things that come up with the advance directives. First is a living will. A living will, we're all familiar with what a will is when you're, say, have a rich relative and they're deciding what their wealth and possessions will, who will own that wealth and possessions after they die. And that's kind of advance directive. It's a document that's prepared while you're alive. It's only going to apply after you're dead and can't speak for yourself. Living will is very similar to that, but includes the stipulations about what you want done if you find yourself in one of those permanent comas. Should your loved ones pull the plug or not? It can be a very difficult decision for a loved one, and it's very considerate of you to relieve them of that decision, tell them what you would want in that circumstance. One legal option that people take when they know that they're not going to be mentally there is to have a proxy making your medical decisions for you. Whether that's someone to decide things like whether to pull the plug when you're in a permanent vegetative state, or say a spouse without dementia that's going to be caring for you, making the decisions about your health when you can't. And that can be very useful because you can't anticipate all possible medical outcomes. So having a proxy there is a heavy responsibility, but it can be one that's very useful. The type of advanced directives that people probably heard about the most is and know it to be an advanced directive anyway, is the do not resuscitate order. It's very frequently an order that's signed by a patient who knows that they have a terminal illness, probably one that they're going to get worse and worse and have a lower and lower quality of life the further they go on. And someone who's signed a do not resuscitate order has decided that there are some circumstances where they would not want to continue living. And physician-assisted suicide is, of course, illegal in most of the United States. So one of the ways they can exercise their right to die when they want is by exercising their right to refuse life-saving treatment. And in the United States, there was a major Supreme Court decision passed maybe 60 years ago that said patients always have the right to refuse treatment, even if it's a treatment that they really, really need, at least when the patient is mentally aware enough to make that decision for themselves. If somebody is in a psychotic state and they think that their medical practitioner advancing on them with a needle is there to kill them, they might refuse treatment. But if it's a treatment that perhaps could save their lives or make them, bring them into a mentally aware state, that we don't want them to be able to refuse treatment in that scenario. But if the patient has been informed about their situation, they're mentally able to make that decision, the courts, as well as major ethical theories, have said they should have that decision over their lives. And of course, probably the most common sort of advanced directive is the designation about whether you want to be an organ donor. From a experiential point of view, that's not an issue for you. If you're having your organs donated, you're already dead. You're beyond making the decision. But a lot of people don't want their organs harvested, whether just for personal emotional reasons or for religious reasons. Very frequently we have refusal to donate organs in the Orthodox Jewish community, for example, because there are verses in Leviticus about the body being like a temple. You have a responsibility to God to keep that temple in good repair. And so Orthodox Jews very frequently refuse organ donation for that reason, and for some of the same reasons they refuse to have even tattoos. It's defacing something that you were supposed to take care of for God. So we have religious freedom in this country, as well as the right to refuse treatment. So we want people to make their own decisions about major medical decisions that might have an impact on their religion. So, as I said, this is all based on the right to refuse. The right to refuse is based on a right to bodily autonomy. You ought to have the ability to decide for yourself whether or not a major medical intervention is going to take place on your own body. Be hard to practice any other right if you don't have the right to your bodily integrity. And so the way that our system respects that right is by giving the patient the right to refuse. And that can lead to a lot of difficult ethical decisions, because rationality is not necessarily an on or off thing. You could have a patient who was rational up into the moment they had a car crash and had major brain damage. But a lot of the cases that we discuss in bioethics class are cases where it's more ambiguous. Somebody usually doesn't have, say, an Alzheimer's diagnosis until after they start experiencing symptoms. But they may still be aware enough to know what's going to happen, know what their prognosis is, and make those advanced directives while they still have autonomy in that sense. So we want to give people the right to refuse. It's not always easy, but it can lead to a lot of decisions where the patient makes a choice that their doctor would disagree with. And part of that is because medical practitioners are trained to prolong life. They're not always trained to maximize quality of life. And so that may be more important to you. If you have, say, a terminal illness, late-stage cancer, you might still have the option of going through a very severe course of chemotherapy, for example. But chemotherapy is a very difficult sort of treatment to have. Chemotherapy, at least the forms of chemotherapy that have some of the worst symptoms are essentially a course of treatment where you're taking in something that is toxic or poisonous to your body. It just hurts the cancer cells quicker, perhaps because the toxin interferes with the process of cell division. Well, all your cells throughout your body are dividing and reproducing all the time. You can't, or it's not always easy to target only the cancerous cells, particularly if the cancer is metastasized and is all over the patient's body. So very often patients with late-stage cancer have the option of continuing treatment with the ability to prolong their life a bit, but the prolonged life would always have a very low quality. And a patient might decide reasonably that they would prefer their having dying by not refusing treatment rather than dipping below a certain threshold of quality of life. And we don't want our doctors making that sort of decision for us and forcing us to live in agony if we can prevent it. So it's just one of many reasons why a patient who's reasonable might prioritize something other than prolonging their life to the maximum extent possible. Of course, we're talking in the American medical context, and we have very expensive health care. So one of the major decisions that patients may have to make near the end of their lives are whether they are going to have a very expensive procedure done in order to have the maximum amount of life, or to not have the disease treated so that they have more to pass on to their loved ones. The financial well-being of the patient's family might be more important to them than their own physical well-being. And as a medical practitioner, you don't have a right to tell them they've decided that wrongly. Even if you strongly urge them to take the thing that's going to extend their life, maybe that's not the right choice for them. And of course, more generally, fulfilling your life projects may be more important to the patient than living longer. Maybe your patient has a life goal of writing a novel or finishing a symphony, and having the surgeries or severe medications that significantly impact your abilities and your quality of life might prevent them from fulfilling some major life project. And it's not obviously wrong for the patient to prioritize their projects over their health, at least not in all circumstances. So We want to give patients the right to decide these major decisions, make these medical decisions for themselves. But what happens if we can't do that? Well, some students in bioethics come in believing that the right gets passed on, like a belonging. I'm not around to ask because I'm in a coma whether I would want my plug pulled. Well, you very frequently have the closest kin or spouse of the patient making those medical decisions. Being a medical proxy is what we call that, as I explained earlier. But the theory behind having a medical proxy like that is not that I'm not here, so now my closest living family member gets to decide. It's that my closest living family member is probably the best expert on who I am and what I want, and so making that decision in a way that would accord with my wishes. So when you have a medical proxy, they're deciding for the patient by trying to make the same decision the patient would if they were able to give informed consent in the circumstance. So that's why we start with the advance directive. If the patient has expressed their wishes in advance while they were mentally cognizant enough to give informed consent, that's what we go with. If no document like that is available, we move on to a family member, whoever's closest to them as their medical proxy. It doesn't have to be a family member. Maybe the patient was estranged from their family, but has a very close friend they would rather have making that decision for themselves. That's because that person, that close friend, has a better handle on what the patient wants than perhaps their own family members. So our legal system is set up in this way to try and protect as much of the patient's autonomy, their free decision-making, as possible. And that often gets expressed by the right to refuse. So we're talking about how this cues in with the ethical theories we've covered. On Kant's theory, deontology, we have a heavy focus on human rights. Kant was instrumental in creating the League of Nations, which was later became the modern UN. So he's has been deeply involved from the very beginning in dialogues concerning human rights. And our most important right is our right to decide what happens with our own bodies. You can't, for example, go out and vote if somebody's decided that you should be in a medically induced coma. So the right to bodily autonomy is really a bedrock right, a right on that if you don't have that, none of your other rights may matter. So it's very important in rights-based dialogues that people's major decision-making over their own body is respected. And from a Kantian perspective, remember that second formulation of the categorical imperative told us to never treat people only as a means to our end, but treat them as an end in themselves at the same time. An end, in this case, can be identified with your major life goals and what you want. So to force a life-saving treatment on a patient who has autonomously refused treatment, in Kantian terms, is a way of treating people merely as a means to the end of extending their lives, disregarding their own wishes, their own ends along the way. And for that reason, a Kantian would reject the forced medical intervention. So Mill also has an interesting perspective on this. On a utilitarian, including Mill in his own writings, has a very high respect for freedom. And you might think, well, freedom is a rights thing, not a maximizing consequences in the world thing. So why would Mill care about freedom? And the argument is, from Mill, is that, especially in his work on liberty, you're the best expert that there is in the world on your own happiness. If you're at least if you're mentally capable of making those decisions, if you're capable of informed consent, you should be given decision-making power because you know the ins and outs of your own life. You know not only how you deal with hardship, but you know your friends and family and how they deal with grief. You know whether or not they would be good at making medical decisions for you, whether they know you well enough to make those decisions on your behalf. So knowing all the details of your life, which your medical practitioner probably won't, you're more of an expert. So your decisions are more likely to lead to happiness and the relief of suffering as you see them than somebody else's. So for a utilitarian, it's very important to have that free, informed decision to make on your own. From a contractarian perspective, from Hobbes or Rawls' perspective, we talk about what's right and wrong through social contracts. And of course, the social contracts that don't respect people's bodily autonomy, their ability to make their own decisions, tend to turn out really badly. So giving patients the right to refuse treatment is a way to prevent some really terrible medical abuses that have taken place in the past, like forced experimentation and various types of eugenics. So we want to have a very high respect for people's right to their own bodily autonomy and make their own major decisions, because it's very important to having a stable and desirable social contract. And finally, Aristotle sheds some really significant light on this because he's using desire satisfaction theory to decide what's right. So Aristotle says that we ought to try and have flourishing lives, and the flourishing lives are the ones that allow us to achieve our major life goals and to be all that we can be. So under desire satisfaction theory, it's more ethically important to make sure people can achieve what they want than it is to make everybody happy. When patients are refusing treatments, very often it's because they have some major life desire that wouldn't be possible if they had that procedure. Which brings me to some of the problems that we come up against when we're talking about in advanced directives, particularly through Dworkin and Dresser. One of the problems is that advanced directives are a good guide to what a person would want to some extent, because it's the person in their own words making their own decisions, but there are significant questions about whether those decisions are properly informed, because it's one thing to know that you have medical diagnosis that's going to lead to increasing dementia symptoms as you get older. It's another thing to know how the disease progresses within yourself, because some people last longer and have higher quality of lives, even living with dementia, than other people. And it's hard to decide in advance what you would want done if you don't have all the relevant information about your quality of life. Dworkin and Dresser discussed this through a patient named Margot, but this hits kind of close to home for me because my grandmother had Alzheimer's disease, And those turned out to be some of the happiest years of her life, in part because her disease progressed in a way that wasn't too distressing for her, but in part because she had really good care, was cared for daily by my aunt. And, growing up, my grandmother never seemed very happy. She was always a very severe woman. But once she had Alzheimer's, and I chalk this up to her, when she was healthy, she had a need to control everything in order to feel safe. But once she had her diagnosis and once she accepted it, she realized that she had to give up a lot of that control and be cared for by others. And turned out, relieved of those anxieties, she had a much happier time of things. So it would be a difficult situation if my grandmother, like Margot, had some sort of advance directive or advance statements about what she wanted, which said that she shouldn't receive medical treatment in case of advanced Alzheimer's. She might be missing out on a lot of quality of life if that had been her choice. So Dworkin falls on the side of the advance directive, saying, we need to respect patients' autonomy to the maximum extent possible, and that means following the wishes that they expressed when they were mentally capable of keeping their overarching life goals in mind. Using that as a way of deciding what's right. The preceding is what happens before. Autonomy is your freedom to make your own choices. So her precedent or precedent autonomy in Margot's case was, according to Dworkin, best represented by her actual wishes, not by some outsider's perception of the quality of her life. While Dresser takes the counterpoint, arguing that most people don't make an advance directive, and the people who do very often don't have enough information about their future condition and quality of life in order to give properly informed consent. And it might be better for the patient's well-being if they instead had a medical proxy, somebody who is mentally aware and capable of taking into account all of the various complicated details of your life that impact your major life projects and quality of life, and being able to make a decision not just on the stereotypical presentation of their disease, not just by evidence that may be 10 years old, but by actual consequences of the real patient. And she argues that should sometimes override our previously expressed wishes. And that does side a little bit more with the experiential quality of life instead of with whether or not we fulfill our major life goals, which Dworkin was more focused on. So that's the basic introduction to advance directives and why they're controversial in the medical setting, where the gray area cases are, where we have to make difficult judgment choices, how we use our major ethical theories to help guide us through some of those judgment difficult decisions, and I hope it sparks some interest in you. Thanks for sticking with me, and I'll see you next time.